Tonight we slip into the muffled, sooty dawn of London, 1855. You are not a duke, nor a pauper. You are something new, something pivotal, and profoundly anxious. You are a clerk. The air is thick with coal smoke and ambition, a pungent mixture that seeps into the wool of your second-best coat as you join the grey river of men flowing towards the financial heart of the empire. Your world is one of paper and ink, a universe bound in calfskin ledgers that weigh more than a small child. Your worth, your very survival in this teeming metropolis, is not measured in brute strength or inherited title, but in the silent, elegant testimony of your handwriting. A single blot, a shaky line, a poorly formed capital Q, and the precarious livelihood you've built can vanish as quickly as ink absorbs into cheap paper. You probably won't survive this, not because of plague or carriage accident, but because your looping us might be judged lazy by a manager with a pince-nez and a heart of flint. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your day begins not at the office, but in the quiet, damp hour before it, in a rented room where the light is poor and the pressure is immense. You wake to the sound of rain on the window pane and the immediate, gnawing awareness of the day's task, transcription. Miles of it. Your fingers, still stiff from yesterday's labor, instinctively curl into a loose fist, rehearsing a grip they haven't even adopted yet. You break your fast with a piece of dry bread and a cup of weak tea, the ritual as much about steadying your nerves as filling your stomach. The bread is important, it's absorbent. You'll use a crumb of it later, a humble tool in the pursuit of pristine paper. This is the dawn of the ledger age, a period historians broadly agree was defined by the explosive growth of commerce, bureaucracy, and the paper trail needed to manage it all. The British Empire was stitching the world together with telegraph cables and steamships, and every transaction, every manifest, every contract in that global network had to be written down by hand. Your hand. You shrug on your coat, its threads worn thin at the cuffs from constant friction with the desk's edge. In your pocket, you carry your most personal possessions, a penknife, a small cake of ink, a few precious steel nibs wrapped in a scrap of chamois. They are the soldier's kit for a daily battle against error. As you step out into the street, the city envelops you in its chaotic symphony. The clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the calls of costermongers, the distant shriek of a railway whistle, all of it is background noise to the script running in your own head. Light shade on the upstroke, firm pressure on the downstroke. Keep the slant consistent at 54 degrees. Remember, the space between words is the width of a lowercase o. This is your mantra. The architecture around you, soot-blackened and grand, speaks of stability and order. The Gothic Revival spires and classical columns are stone embodiments of the very principles you must apply to your penmanship: proportion, harmony, unwavering rule. You are a walking contradiction, a tiny, anxious cog in a machine of immense, imperial confidence, and the only thing connecting you to that grandeur is the line you can draw with a nib. You merge into the stream of other clerks. You see it in their eyes, the same calculated calm, the same slight tremor in the fingers that they hide by clasping their hands behind their backs. You don't speak. There's a silent camaraderie in this shared vulnerability. Your destination is a counting house, a temple of numbers and script tucked away in a warren of lanes near the Bank of England. The air here smells different, less of horse dung and more of paper, glue, and the peculiar, metallic scent of ink. You push open a heavy oak door, and the outside world falls away, replaced by a hushed, focused quiet, broken only by the soft scratching of a dozen pens, the gentle thud of a ledger being closed, and the occasional, tragic sigh that follows an irredeemable mistake. You hang your coat and hat on a worn peg, your place in the hierarchy marked by the peg's distance from the manager's glass-partitioned office. You take your seat at a tall, sloping desk, its surface etched with the ghosts of 10,000 calculations. You smooth the front of your waistcoat, a gesture of psychological preparation. The ledger before you is open, a vast landscape of creamy, lined paper. You unwrap your tools. The day, and the test, begins now. Your success, your ability to keep this room, this coat, this life, depends entirely on the beauty and clarity of the marks you are about to make. There are no second drafts. There is only the permanent, unforgiving record. Your hands move with a practiced, almost reverent routine, laying out the tools of your trade on the blotter. This isn't just stationery, it's an arsenal, and each component's quality directly influences the battle you're about to wage on paper. First, the pen. Yesterday, you spent a precious quarter hour after work preparing it. It started as a simple goose quill, plucked from a wing, its barrel still faintly echoing the bird's life. You selected it for its diameter, thick enough to be robust, slender enough to be graceful, and then you cured it. Historians still argue whether drying the quibs in hot sand or warm ash produced a more durable and responsive nib, a debate as heated in its time as processor speeds are today. You used the penknife, its blade kept obsessively sharp, to perform the delicate surgery, slicing the end at an angle, making the slit up the shaft to channel the ink, and finally, shaping the nib's point with a series of precise, tiny cuts. A single slip of the knife, a cut a fraction too deep, and the quill would split under pressure, ruining a morning's work with a sudden splatter. A well-made quill, however, was a masterpiece of organic engineering, flexible yet strong, capable of producing the hairline upstrokes and voluptuous downstrokes that defined professional script. You hold yours now, its shaft smoothed by hours of use, its tip a glossy black from repeated immersion. It feels like an extension of your own nervous system. Next, the ink. You don't just uncork a bottle. You are, in this moment, a pharmacist. The office supplies a gritty, commercial ink, but it's prone to fading or corroding the nib. The ambitious clerk, the one who dreams of promotion to head copyist, makes his own. Your small ink cake, wrapped in paper, is a concentrated blend of iron salts, gallnut tannin, and gum arabic. You scrape a portion into the ceramic inkwell's reservoir and add a few careful drops of water from a small jug on your desk. Then, with a glass rod, you stir. You stir for a full minute, watching the dark particles dissolve into a deep, velvety black. The consistency is everything. Too thick, and it clots on the nib, refusing to flow. Too thin, and it bleeds into the paper fibers, creating a fuzzy, disgraceful line known as a feather. You dip the very tip of your quill to test it, drawing a tiny, deliberate line on the blotter's margin. The ink flows smoothly, drying to a matte, permanent black. This is the famous iron gall ink, the standard for centuries, and its chemical reaction, the soluble ferrous salts oxidizing upon exposure to air into insoluble ferric compounds, is what makes it so gloriously permanent and so viciously corrosive to paper over the very long term. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail is that the very best ink was often judged by its smell. Connoisseurs claimed a well-brewed batch had a faint, astringent, almost wine-like aroma, a far cry from the vinegary reek of a poorly fermented one. Finally, the paper. You run your fingertips lightly over the sheet in the ledger. It's wove paper, not laid, meaning it has a smooth, uniform surface without the watermark ridges. This is a premium commodity. You've handled the cheap stuff, brittle, acidic sheets that yellowed in weeks and were so porous they drank ink like a sponge. This paper, however, has a slight size to it, a treatment of gelatin or alum that makes it less absorbent, giving the ink time to sit on the surface and dry with a crisp edge. Your livelihood depends on this interaction of fiber and fluid. A single hair or speck of dust embedded in the pulp could catch your nib, sending a droplet skidding or tearing a hole in the sheet. You've learned to inspect each page with a gentle sweep of the hand before you begin. You arrange the paper at the exact angle dictated by your training, aligning its lines with the edge of the desk to ensure your script's uniform slant. The ledger itself is a fortress of information, its pages stitched and bound in a way meant to last for decades, for audits and legal scrutiny. You are not just writing for today's manager, you are writing for a future you will never see, for accountants and barristers unborn. The weight of that temporal responsibility settles on your shoulders as you take a deep, quiet breath. The quill is in your hand, the ink is perfect, the paper is pristine. The universe has narrowed to this point of contact. You dip, you tap the nib gently against the well's edge to shed the excess, a ritual as precise as a duelist's salute, and you bring the tip to the paper. The first stroke is always the hardest, a commitment in permanent black. You begin. The first few words flow, a familiar warm-up, but your mind is not on their meaning. You are a musician playing scales, an athlete stretching before a race. Your conscious thought is consumed by form, not content. This dissociation is a learned skill, and its textbook is not a novel or a treatise, but your copybook. It sits on a shelf above your desk, its spine cracked from use, its pages filled with perfect, ghostly exemplars of every letter, numeral, and ligature known to commerce. This is your gospel, your immutable scripture. There is no room for personal expression here, no artistic flourish that hasn't been pre-approved by a master engraver decades before you were born. The copybook's models were etched onto copper plates and printed in pale ink, leaving you to trace their forms again and again, a penitent seeking grace through repetition. You didn't learn to write sentences, you learned to construct characters, each one a miniature architecture of strokes. Your memory flicks back to your apprenticeship, a haze of drudgery and ink-stained fingers. Hours were spent on single elements. Pages devoted to the basic strokes, the straight line, the compound curve, the oval. You filled sheets with rows of majestic, standalone eyes, their serifs perfectly balanced. You practiced mesemness until the hump and valley rhythm of them became as natural as your own heartbeat. The copybook's mantra was form before speed, correctness before character. A widely accepted historical fact is that this pedagogical method, derived from earlier European masters, created a remarkable uniformity in clerical hands across the English-speaking world. A lawyer in London, a ship's purser in Bombay, and a bank clerk in Sydney could all produce a line of text that was, for all functional purposes, interchangeable. This was the point. Personality was a flaw, a deviation from the corporate ideal. Your signature might have a hint of flair, a single allowed idiosyncrasy, but the body of the text? It had to look as if it were produced by the ledger itself, not a fallible human. The exemplars in your copybook are not just letters, they are moral lessons. The upright character of the capital T speaks of integrity. The balanced, open bowls of the and suggest transparency and honesty. The connected, flowing letters of a word like accepted demonstrate reliability and continuous effort. You were taught, explicitly, that good handwriting reflected a good mind, orderly, disciplined, and attentive to detail. Bad handwriting, by contrast, was a sign of sloppy thinking, moral laxity, or even deceit. As you form the phrase "received with thanks" for the 50th time this week, you are not just recording a transaction, you are performing virtue. You are signaling to anyone who sees this page that you, the writer, are trustworthy, precise, and subservient to the system. The content is almost irrelevant. The form is the message. This creates a peculiar cognitive split. Part of your brain is engrossed in the mechanical poetry of the pen's dance, the slight rotation of the quill between thumb and forefinger to engage the right corner of the nib for a shade, the effortless glide of a hairline upstroke made with the nib's tip. The other part of your brain is parsing the words you are copying from the draft list provided by a junior partner. 12 bales of jute, 40 quintals of indigo, 3 casks of madder. They are just nouns and numbers, cargo for your pen to carry onto the page. Your job is to be a flawless conduit, not an interpreter. Historians still argue whether this intense, early focus on rote copying stifled creativity and critical thought in the burgeoning clerical class, or whether it provided the essential mental discipline required to manage the complexity of modern business. As your pen moves, you suspect it might be a bit of both. The repetition is meditative, a shield against the chaos of the outside world. But it also builds a cage of expectations, where the highest compliment you can receive is that your work looks unremarkable, that it fits in perfectly, leaving no trace of you behind except the fact of its perfect execution. You complete the entry, and your eyes flick up to the copybook's open page, a silent comparison. Not quite. The descender on the Y in madder is a hair too short. You make a mental note. Tomorrow, you will practice YS for 15 minutes before work. The gospel demands it. To correct that descender, to achieve the effortless flow you see in the copybook, you must engage not just your fingers, but your entire body. You are not a scribbler. You are a dancer, and the desk is your stage. This is where the real training began, long before a quill ever touched paper, with the dancing master's lessons. You consciously adjust now, a series of minute calibrations that have become second nature. First, your feet. They are flat on the floor, providing a stable foundation. Your chair is positioned so your torso is a hand's breadth from the desk's edge, preventing a hunched, cramped posture that would limit your reach and tire your muscles. Your back is straight, but not rigid, as if a gentle string is pulling you up from the crown of your head. You've seen the new clerks, the ones who haven't had their posture beaten into them by a tutor with a light cane, slouching over their work. Within an hour, they are a mess of neck aches and blurred vision, their writing shrinking and distorting as their bodies collapse in on themselves. You will be here for 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours. Efficiency of movement is survival. Now, the arm. This is the critical departure from how a child, or a mere correspondent, writes. They use their fingers, a cramped, scratching motion that produces a spidery, inconsistent script and guarantees crippling fatigue. You are taught to write from the shoulder. Your right forearm rests on the muscle just below the elbow, acting as a pivot point. Your wrist is raised slightly off the paper, frozen in place. Your fingers? They merely hold the pen, lightly, like you're cradling a bird's egg. The power, the sweep, the grandeur of the movement comes from the shoulder and upper arm. To practice this, your first lessons involved air writing, standing before a slate and tracing giant letters using only the motion of your entire arm, your wrist locked, your fingers still. It felt absurd, like conducting an orchestra for an audience of one skeptical tutor. But gradually, the larger muscles, capable of far more endurance than the delicate tendons of the fingers, learned their part. A downstroke is a controlled, relaxed drop of the arm. A curve is a gentle, pivot-assisted arc. The result is a consistency and flow that finger writing could never achieve. Your handwriting, at its best, doesn't look written, it looks grown. The grip itself is a studied pose. You hold the quill between the pads of your thumb and forefinger, with the middle finger providing support beneath the shaft. The remaining fingers curl gently into the palm, a relaxed fist. The angle of the pen to the paper is sacrosanct, typically around 54 degrees for the copperplate style you're using. This isn't arbitrary. It's the angle that presents the broad edge of the nib perfectly to the paper for creating those dramatic thick and thin contrasts. To maintain this through a long line, your whole body turns minutely, a slow, conscious rotation from the core. Writing a full line across a ledger page is a physical journey. You start with your body oriented slightly to the left, and as your arm sweeps right, you allow your torso to follow, just a degree or two, keeping the relationship between nib and page constant. It's a slow, graceful Tai Chi form performed sitting down. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail from the copybooks is the frequent admonishment to keep the left hand, the quiet hand, occupied usefully. It should hold the paper steady, or lie flat on the desk to balance the body. But under no circumstances should it wander into a pocket or, heaven forbid, prop up your head. That way lay sloth, asymmetry, and moral decay visible in the resulting script. You apply this full body discipline now as you start a new column of figures. The numbers must be as flawless as the letters. A poorly formed 7 can be mistaken for a 1, a disaster in accounting. You plant your left hand firmly on the ledger's gutter, steadying the massive book. You take a breath, engage the shoulder, and begin the first fall. It's a 2-part numeral, a sharp, angled downstroke for the left side, and a swift, curved movement for the closed top and vertical leg. It happens in a second, a tiny masterpiece of coordinated muscle memory. The downstroke is dark and confident, the thinner lines precise. There is no hesitation, no scratchiness. It is the product of thousands of hours of drilling these movements until they became as automatic as walking. Historians still argue whether this intense physical regimen, designed to produce beautiful writing, had unintended consequences on the clerk's health, promoting better posture and core strength, or whether the long, static hours simply traded one set of ailments for another. As you finish the column and feel the pleasant, warm fatigue in your deltoid rather than a cramp in your hand, you lean back for a moment, rolling your shoulder gently. The dance continues, one graceful, deliberate stroke at a time. The ledger fills not with the frantic scratching of a prisoner, but with the measured, corporeal poetry of a trained artist. Every perfect letter is a testament to a forgotten athletics. As you finish that column of figures, your eye doesn't just see numbers. It unconsciously assesses the invisible scaffolding upon which they are built. Each character exists within a strict geometric grid, a ghostly architecture that governs every curve and line. This is the secret grammar of elegance, the mathematics of beauty that separates the professional from the amateur. Before you ever inked a letter, you spent weeks with just a pencil and ruler, dissecting the copybook exemplars into their component parts. You learned that the lowercase x height, the body of letters like a, C, E, is exactly 1/5 of the total space between your ruled lines. The ascenders, the tops of B, D, H, and descenders, the tails of G, P, Y, each claim another 2/5 of that space. This proportional system, a widely accepted historical practice derived from Renaissance scribal traditions, creates an immediate, harmonious rhythm on the page. Your writing has a visual cadence as reliable as a metronome's beat. But the geometry goes deeper than simple proportions. Every slant is identical. You don't just aim for a bit slanty. You aim for a precise angle, most commonly 54 degrees from the horizontal. To ensure this, you don't trust your eye alone. In your early training, you would place a slant card, a sheet of paper with parallel lines drawn at exactly 54 degrees, beneath your practice sheet. The ghost lines would guide your strokes until the muscle memory was etched into your shoulder. Now, you can feel the correctness in the pivot of your arm. A letter leaning at 50 degrees looks sluggish, drunk. One at 60 degrees looks frantic, anxious. 54 degrees is the golden mean of calm authority. Then come the shapes. The oval is the foundational form. The bowls of your D, G, O, and Q are not circles. They are ovals with a specific axis that matches your slant. Practicing perfect, consistent ovals, their sides symmetrical and their curves smooth, was a monk-like devotion. A poorly formed oval makes a word look lumpy, diseased. Even the white space is mathematically dictated. The space between words is not arbitrary, it is the width of a lowercase o. This creates a consistent texture, a balanced gray tone across the page that is easy on the eye of an accountant reviewing pages of dense figures. The space between letters within a word is tighter, but still governed by rule. The inside of a curve, like the right side of an N, should nearly, but not quite, touch the downstroke of the following letter, like the left side of an I. This creates a sense of connected flow without actual ligatures, a visual linking of characters that speeds reading. You are not just writing words, you are designing a page, orchestrating positive and negative space with the precision of an engraver. A lesser-known, slightly amusing practice among advanced students was blind analysis, where a master would take a sample of a clerk's writing, rule a fine grid over it in pencil, and then measure every angle and proportion to diagnose faults with the cold detachment of a surgeon. Your ascender on the F is 0.3 mm short of the standard, and the slant on your K degrades to 52 degrees under fatigue, he might say. Your soul, it seemed, could be measured in millimeters. This rigid geometry might seem stifling, but within its confines lies a strange freedom. It's the freedom of a sonnet writer or a composer writing in a strict form. The constraints force a clarity and a focus that random expression cannot achieve. Knowing the rules so deeply that they disappear is the ultimate goal. When you write the word sterling, you aren't consciously calculating the oval of the S or the 54-degree angle of the T's crossbar. You are releasing a shape that has been geometrically encoded into your muscle memory. The beauty is in the adherence to the invisible law. Historians still argue whether this obsession with geometric perfection in Victorian penmanship reflected a broader, almost Newtonian worldview, a belief that universal laws of order and proportion governed aesthetics, society, and the universe itself, or whether it was simply the most efficient way to produce legible records for an industrializing world. As you rule a faint, light line to begin a new account entry, you are a geometer of commerce, using the axioms of angle and curve to map the flow of capital. The page is your theorem, and every perfectly executed letter is a QED. The clock on the wall ticks with a sound like a tiny hammer on an anvil, marking the passage of the morning. You've been at your task for hours, and yet your quill feels as responsive as when you began, a testament to its quality and your care. But a quiet revolution sits in a small, lacquered box at the corner of your desk, a revolution that has already changed your world and is poised to change it even more: the steel pen. You remember your first one, a decade ago. It came in a packet of 6, wrapped in thin paper, each nib stamped with a maker's mark: Perry, Gillott, Brandauer. It felt like heresy. No whittling, no curing, no delicate surgery. It was ready. You simply slid its stiff, cold shaft into a wooden or ivory holder and began to write. The consistency was a revelation. A steel nib, provided it wasn't damaged or corroded by cheap ink, wrote the same line at dawn as it did at dusk. It didn't soften or flex unpredictably like a quill could. This uniformity was a boon to the ledger's aesthetic, but it also raised the bar. When every clerk has access to a near-perfect tool, the variance in output shrinks. Excellence becomes the baseline, and mere competence is no longer enough. The ink, too, has undergone its own quiet standardization. The iron gall recipe remains, but now it's brewed in vast vats by companies like Stevens or Waterman's, bottled under famous labels, and sold across the empire. You still have your ink cake for fine work, but for daily drudgery, you use the office bottle. It's reliable, of a known quality, and it dries to that same essential black. This reliability is a double-edged sword. It removes one variable from the equation, letting your skill shine through. But it also means there are no more excuses. A blot can no longer be blamed on a bad batch of homemade ink or a flawed quill. A failure of line is now, unequivocally, a failure of the writer. The tools have been democratized. The pressure to excel has been universalized. A widely accepted historical fact is that the mass production of affordable steel pens in the mid-19th century was a key factor in the dramatic expansion of literacy and clerical work, putting the means of professional penmanship into the hands of millions. You pause to switch nibs. The one you've been using, a fine account point, is starting to feel slightly rough. A tiny, invisible burr has formed on its tip. With a quill, this would mean minutes of careful resharpening with your penknife, a risky operation at your desk. With the steel pen, you simply unscrew the holder, drop the used nib into a tin of discards, to be sent back to the manufacturer for grinding and retipping one day, and select a new one from your box. You choose a slightly more flexible nib this time, one that will give a more dramatic shade to your capitals for the new heading you're about to write. Account current, Messrs. Fortnum and Mason. The action is swift, clean, and mechanical. This is the industrial age entering your bloodstream through your fingertips. The rhythmic scratch of quills around you is now punctuated by the softer, more metallic whisper of steel on paper, a sound as modern as the telegraph's click. There's a lesser-known, slightly amusing cultural battle that raged in the pages of clerical journals and writing masters' pamphlets over this very transition. Traditionalists, often older masters who made their living selling quills and lessons in cutting them, decried the steel pen as soulless. They claimed it produced a hard, mechanical line that lacked the organic warmth and variation of a goose quill. They argued it encouraged laziness, divorcing the clerk from the intimate understanding of his tool. Progressives, of course, hailed it as a liberator, a boon to efficiency and legibility. They sniped that the only soul in a quill was the mess and uncertainty it introduced. You, pragmatically, use both. The steel pen for the vast bulk of your work, and a finely prepared crow quill for particularly delicate flourishes or when you need to write on glossy surfaces where a rigid steel point might skid. Historians still argue whether the shift to steel pens ultimately degraded the art of handwriting by making it too easy to achieve passable results, thereby reducing the incentive for the deep, physical training of the arm method, or whether it simply freed that artistry to be applied more consistently. As you screw the new, flexible nib into its holder, you feel its potential. It's a precision instrument. The responsibility for what it produces lies entirely with you, the engine of flesh and bone guiding its cold, perfect point. You dip it into the standardized, bottled ink, give it the customary 2 taps, and bring it to the paper. The first stroke of the capital A4 count flows out, a thick, confident shade that tapers to a hairline with a responsiveness that feels like an extension of your own will. The tools are perfect. Now, you must be. That capital A unfolds under your nib with a confident, almost sensual elegance. It's a declaration. This is no mere letter. It is a specimen of copperplate, the undisputed monarch of Victorian business scripts. The style gets its name from its origin. The elegant, flowing hands of 18th century English writing masters were engraved onto copper plates for printing in copybooks. Those engraved lines, with their dramatic contrast between impossibly thin hairlines and swelling, shaded downstrokes, became the ideal to which every clerk aspired. To master copperplate is to master the visual language of trust, stability, and genteel prosperity. Your begins with a hairline curve, like a diver's arm reaching up, before plunging down into a thick, generous shade for the left leg. The pen seems to pause, pooling ink for a microsecond, before lifting and crossing to form the right leg with another shade, and finally finishing with a horizontal crossbar that sits perfectly balanced, just below the nib point. The entire character is canted at that sacred 54-degree angle, and its 2 shaded legs create a sense of deep, shadowed volume, as if carved in low relief. This is the script of banknotes, bonds, and marriage certificates. It is slow, deliberate, and unforgiving. As you move into the body of the entry for Fortnum and Mason, the copperplate discipline governs every connection. The lowercase letters are designed to link seamlessly, minimizing pen lifts and creating a continuous, rhythmic flow across the page. The O in current ends with a tiny, upward flick that becomes the starting point for the U. The R that follows is a study in restraint, a downstroke, a small curve, and then a subtle compound curve that doesn't quite touch the next A, avoiding a blot while maintaining the linked appearance. This is where the physical training pays off. The uniform slant and the arm movement create a natural flow that makes these connections feel inevitable, not forced. A finger writer attempting copperplate would produce a spidery, trembling imitation, their joins awkward and their shades inconsistent. Yours has the authority of engineered grace. It is a script built for importance, not for speed. Every shaded downstroke requires a conscious, slight increase of pressure, a flexing of the nib, or, with a quill, a flattening of the tip. It's a controlled violence on the paper, a commitment. A widely accepted historical fact is that the shaded copperplate hand became so synonymous with financial and legal documents that it fostered a unique form of trust. The very appearance of the script conveyed legitimacy, making forgery a daunting task of artistic replication as much as criminal intent. But this beauty has a temper. Copperplate is a tyrant. It offers very little tolerance for error or correction. The iron gall ink is permanent. A slip of the hand that creates an unintended shade, a wobble in a hairline, a droplet of ink falling from an overcharged nib, these are catastrophes. You have your tricks. The breadcrumb from breakfast can be rolled gently over a small, wet smudge to absorb excess ink before it sets. For a broken hairline, you might, with infinite care, use the dry tip of a needle to scrape away a fiber of paper to disguise the flaw. But a major blot? That often means rewriting the entire page, a soul-crushing prospect when you're 3/4 finished. This constant, low-grade anxiety is the backdrop to your concentration. You are walking a tightrope of ink, where elegance is just one tremor away from disaster. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail is the pen wiper, a small, often embroidered cloth pad that was a constant companion. Between dips in the inkwell, you would dart the nib into its folds, a quick, ritualistic cleansing to prevent build-up. An overly enthusiastic clerk might wipe too vigorously and bend a delicate nib, a small tragedy that would draw sympathetic grimaces from his neighbors. The content you are transcribing, lists of exotic goods, prices in pounds, shillings, and pence, is mundane. The form is everything. You are wrapping the ordinary commerce of tea, ham, and preserves in a cloak of timeless dignity. Historians still argue whether the dominance of copperplate in business, with its inherent slowness and formality, actually hindered commercial efficiency as the pace of trade accelerated, or whether the very deliberateness of the act enforced a necessary carefulness in an era of high-stakes, long-distance transactions where a mistake could mean ruin. As you form the ampersand in Fortnum and Mason, a particularly lovely ligature of the letters in T, you feel the weight of that argument. The ampersand is a tiny masterpiece of calligraphy, a flourish allowed within the strict rules. It takes time. But in taking that time, it signals respect, attention, permanence. You finish the entry and sit back for a moment, surveying the line. It is perfect. It looks less like your writing and more like a line from the copybook itself, sprung to life in your ledger. In that moment, there is a deep, quiet satisfaction. You have not just recorded an order for gentleman's relish. You have, for a few square inches of paper, achieved the ideal. Your gaze lifts from your own impeccable copperplate and drifts across the room, landing on the work of a new junior clerk 2 desks over. His hand is different. The letters are more upright, the shades less dramatic, and there's a certain swift, running quality to it that seems to flow from the pen with an easier, less labored rhythm. You recognize it immediately: Spencerian. It's the American cousin, the challenger at the gate. Developed by Platt Rogers Spencer in the 1840s, it's a script designed not for the engraver's burin, but for the human arm. Where copperplate is based on the oval, Spencerian is based on the figure 8 or wavy line. Its fundamental principle is rhythm and relaxation. The slant is gentler, around 52 degrees. The shades are subtler, applied only on the downward curves of letters, not on every downstroke. The result is a script that appears lighter, faster, and more natural, or so its advocates claim. It's been creeping into British counting houses via business correspondence from New York and Chicago, carried on invoices and bills of lading. To traditionalists, it looks anemic, lacking the gravitas of good English shading. To the overworked junior clerk, it looks like a potential lifeline, a way to be both legible and quick. You remember the first time you saw a Spencerian copybook. The exemplars had a lyrical, almost musical quality. The capital O looked less like a carved monument and more like a banner flowing in a breeze. Proponents argued it was more physiological, causing less fatigue because it required less forceful pressure. The movement was more in the fingers and wrist, a return to a degree of digital dexterity, though still supported by the arm. It was, in essence, a compromise script, and in a profession built on uncompromising standards, that made it controversial. Some forward-thinking British writing masters began to offer it as an alternate commercial hand, a modern system for the modern age. The debate it sparked in trade journals and in the hushed conversations during the lunch break was surprisingly fierce. Was it progress or degeneration? Was the goal of penmanship unassailable beauty, or efficient communication? The Spencerian, you notice on the Juni's page, is a simple, pointed shape, like a V sitting on the line. Your copperplate is a complex dance of two curves. His is faster. Yours is, you must admit, more beautiful. A lesser-known, slightly amusing aspect of this transatlantic script war was the national pride involved. For many British clerks and masters, copperplate was English. It was tied to the great engravers like Bickham and Snell, to the heritage of the empire itself. Spencerian was brash, new, and American, practical, maybe, but lacking in heritage and depth. Adopting it felt like a cultural concession. Yet, its practicality was undeniable. In offices where the volume of correspondence was exploding, where the telegraph demanded quick transcription of brief messages, a faster hand had undeniable economic appeal. The junior clerk finishes his line and looks up, catching your eye. He gives a slight, almost apologetic smile, as if aware he's practicing a mild heresy. You offer a neutral nod. Historians still argue whether the introduction of Spencerian and other simplified hands in the latter half of the 19th century represented a genuine innovation based on a better understanding of physiology, or merely a dumbing down of standards driven by commercial haste and the influx of less rigorously trained clerks. As you look back at your own page, the deeply shaded copperplate now looks somehow heavier. More monumental, yes, but also more burdensome. You return to your work, but the seed of comparison is planted. The next word you write is quantity. You write it in your flawless copperplate. But as you form the Q, with its extravagant, looping tail that dips deeply below the line, you experiment mentally. How would a Spencerian Q look? It would be simpler. The tail would be a single, elegant curve, less flamboyant but swifter. Would it be worse? Or just different? The question is almost subversive. Your entire professional identity is built on the premise that the copperplate ideal is the only ideal. To question it is to question the thousands of hours you've spent in its service. Yet, The world outside the counting house is changing faster than the script in its ledgers. The pens are steel, the ink is bottled, the pace is quickening. Perhaps the writing itself must change too. You finish quantity and the numbers that follow. Your hand is steady, the script impeccable. But for the first time today, you feel a faint tremor of obsolescence, not in your skill, but in the very style that defines it. The beautiful, slow majesty of copperplate might not be the final word after all. It has a rival, whispering from across the Atlantic with a lighter touch and a promise of speed. The whisper of doubt fades as a familiar, dull ache begins to announce its presence. It starts as a faint tightness in the ball of your right thumb, then spreads into a hot, prickling sensation along the muscle of your forearm. You've been at this for over 4 hours now, and the physical toll of perfection is cashing its check. This is the shadow side of the art, the corporeal cost of all that geometric beauty. You are not just a copyist, you are an athlete in a brutally constrained discipline, and your body keeps a meticulous ledger of strain. The condition even has a name, one spoken with a mix of pride and grimace: Scrivener's palsy. It was a widely recognized occupational disease, a form of what we'd now call a repetitive strain injury or focal dystonia. For you, in this moment, it's the creeping awareness that your most valuable asset, your controlled, reliable hand, is made of fallible flesh and bone. You flex your fingers under the desk, a discreet, rolling motion meant to coax blood back into the cramped muscles. The posture, so carefully cultivated, is itself a kind of elegant prison. Your shoulder, held in that fixed, pivoting position, is a knot of tension. Your neck is stiff from the hours of looking down at the same precise angle. Your eyes feel dry and gritty, strained from deciphering faint draft notes and focusing on the microscopic world of nib and paper. The light in the room, filtering through high, soot-streaked windows, is perpetually inadequate, a twilight that forces you to lean ever so slightly forward, compounding the spinal ache. You have learned the tricks to manage it. Every hour, if the workload permits, you allow yourself a 30-second pause. You look into the middle distance, blurring your focus to rest your eyes. You rotate your wrist gently, stretch your fingers wide, then make a fist. You might take a sip of now cold tea from the cup at your elbow. These are stolen moments of bodily rebellion against the rigid discipline you impose upon yourself. A lesser-known, slightly amusing array of Victorian remedies existed for these ailments. Advertisements in the back of newspapers promised everything from Dr. Font's invigorating writing electuary, a dubious tonic, to magnetic bracelets that would channel the world's energies to calm the trembling hand. More practical manuals recommended hand baths in warm water followed by cold, or massages with energizing liniments that smelled strongly of camphor and disappointment. The most common advice, and the most brutal, was simply to persevere through the pain, to strengthen the will along with the muscle. After all, a true clerk's character was proven not just by his output, but by his endurance. The specter of the palsy was a constant threat. In its advanced stages, it could cause a persistent, uncontrollable tremor or a locking of the fingers, effectively ending a career. It was the physical manifestation of professional anxiety, a reminder that the machine could break down. You've seen it happen to an older colleague, a man with 30 years of flawless service. One day, his ease began to wobble. Within a month, his hand was a trembling ruin, and he was pensioned off with a few pounds and a handshake, his value spent. You press the heel of your left hand into the sore muscle of your right forearm, applying a firm, circular pressure. It helps, a little. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of these ailments was an inevitable byproduct of the profession's demands, or whether it was exacerbated by poor teaching that emphasized form over ergonomics, and by the Dickensian conditions of many offices: poor light, bad air, unforgiving furniture. As you resume writing, You do so with a conscious effort to relax your grip, to ease the pressure on the nib, to find a sustainable rhythm within the pain. The writing continues, but it is now a negotiation between mind and matter. The ideal script exists in a platonic realm of perfect lines and curves. Your body is the muddy, protesting vehicle trying to navigate its way there. Each perfect letter from here until the lunch bell will be a small victory, not just of skill, but of endurance. You think of the junior clerk with his Spencerian, his claim of a more natural, less fatiguing hand. In this moment of ache, you understand the appeal all too well. But you are a master of copperplate. Your identity, your pride, is woven into its shaded strokes. So you breathe through the discomfort, you adjust your posture by a millimeter, and you continue. The pen moves, the ink flows, the ledger fills. The pain is simply another entry in the day's accounts, a debit to be paid for the credit of a perfectly rendered page. The words and numbers you transcribe are meaningless to you. 723 bales, invoice value £4,000 sterling, payable at 60 days sight. They are cargo, abstract values, promises and obligations. Your mind is a locked room, and the meaning of these phrases is politely but firmly asked to wait outside. Your entire conscious being is focused on the act of duplication. This is the true mental gymnastics of the copyist, a feat of dissociation as impressive as any physical skill. You are not reading for comprehension, you are scanning the draft for shape, sequence, and potential pitfalls. Your eyes flick from the messy, often hurried script of the merchant or senior partner's draft note to your pristine page. You don't see bales of cotton, you see a B, an F, an L, an S. You see the capital F in full, and note it will require a full shade and a looped crossbar. You see the number 4000, and calculate the spacing needed to align it perfectly in the money column without cramping. Your brain is a processing unit, translating visual input into a series of precise motor commands, while actively suppressing any higher-level analysis. It is a form of meditation, but one with severe, real-world penalties for a wandering mind. This mental state creates a peculiar kind of stress. The fear is not of the unknown, but of a very specific, known catastrophe, the error. A transposed digit in an invoice amount. An omitted line in a contract clause. A misspelled name on a bill of lading. The consequences could range from a humiliating reprimand to a financial loss for the firm, for which you could be held liable, your wages docked. Your concentration, therefore, is a bulwark against ruin. You develop rituals to reinforce it. You might whisper the numbers under your breath as you write them, a dual audio-visual check. You touch the tip of your pen to each word on the draft as you finish copying it, a physical anchor to prevent your place from being lost. After finishing a complex entry, your eyes will travel back to the draft and then down your own line, letter by letter, number by number, in a silent, agonizingly slow verification. It's exhausting. The mental energy required for this sustained, high-stakes focus is immense, and by midday, a different kind of fatigue sets in, a fog of cognitive weariness where letters begin to swim, and the urge to just read the content, to understand the story of the transaction, becomes a dangerous distraction. A lesser-known, slightly amusing psychological twist was the phenomenon of the pausiveration error. After writing the same word or number repeatedly, your mind could get stuck in a loop. You might be copying an inventory list, 12 bolts of velvet, 15 bolts of velvet, 18 bolts of velvet. And then, when the draft changes to 22 bolts of damask, your traitorous hand writes velvet again. It's a brain hiccup, a short circuit of the automatic process. When you catch it, a cold wash of dread hits you. Correction is a fraught art in a permanent ink world. The prescribed method is to take your penknife, the same one used for quills, and with the very tip, gently abrade the surface of the paper, scraping away the erroneous word without tearing the sheet. You then use the heel of your hand or a special bone folder to burnish the scraped spots smooth, and only then do you write the correction, hoping the texture will not show under later scrutiny. It's a tense, microscopic operation. Each one is a tiny public confession of fallibility, a flaw in the perfect facade. A widely accepted historical reality is that the mental strain of this work, combined with long hours and low pay, contributed to a stereotype of the clerk as anxious, pale, and prone to nervous disorders, a far cry from the robust ideal of the Englishman. Historians still argue whether this intense, meaning-suppressing focus required for flawless copying had a dehumanizing effect, turning clerks into living automata, or whether it cultivated a powerful, almost Zen-like discipline of the mind that was valuable in itself. As you finish verifying a lengthy entry and prepare to dip your pen again, you feel the mental strain as a pressure behind your eyes. The ledger in front of you is not just a book. It is a maze you are navigating blindfolded, trusting only the muscle memory of your hand and the fierce, narrow beam of your attention. The world of the counting house, the scratch of pens, the rustle of paper, the distant clop of hooves from the street, recedes into a hum. There is only the draft, the page, and the fragile bridge of concentration you build between them, over which the cargo of commerce must pass without a single item lost, damaged, or misdirected. It is a silence filled with immense noise. A sudden, sharp thwack from the manager's office breaks your trance. It's not the sound of a hand hitting a desk, but something drier, more mechanical. You glance over to see Mr. Hinchliffe, the senior partner, operating the new press. The spectre of the copying machine has entered your sanctuary. It's a letterpress, a contraption of screw, plate, and damp tissue paper. He has just written an important outgoing letter in his best hand. Now, instead of having you or another clerk spend an hour making a duplicate by hand for the firm's records, he places the original on the press's bed, covers it with a dampened tissue sheet, and lowers the plate. With a grunt, he turns the screw, applying immense, even pressure. When he lifts it, the tissue has absorbed a mirror image of the wet ink from the original. He peels it off and lays it aside to dry, creating a faint, backwards copy that can be read through the sheet. It's a revelation. It's a threat. The technology isn't new. James Watt of steam engine fame perfected an early version decades ago, but its presence in your counting house is a recent, unsettling development. For certain documents, it makes perfect sense. One writing effort yields 2 copies. The principle of duplication, your entire raison d'etre, has been mechanized. Then there are the rubber stamps, another creeping innovation. For common phrases like received, paid, or the firm's address, a clerk can now simply ink a stamp and press it onto the page. The letters are perfectly uniform, utterly soulless, and produced in a fraction of a second. You watch a junior use one to mark a stack of receipts. Thump, thump, thump. It's hypnotic and horrifying. Where is the skill in that? Where is the testimony of the human hand? The ink from the stamp sits on the surface of the paper, glossy and alien, unlike the matte, absorbed ink of a pen. It looks cheap. It feels like cheating. A widely accepted historical fact is that these copying technologies were the first faint cracks in the monolithic world of manual transcription, the initial steps on a path that would lead, inevitably, to the typewriter and beyond. Yet, for now, their threat is limited. The press only works if the original is written in special, slow-drying copying ink, which is prone to smudging and is awful to write with. The damp tissue copies are fragile, prone to fading, and lack the legal permanence of a proper entry in a bound ledger. The stamps are useful for the repetitive, low-value markings, but they cannot compose, they cannot adapt, they cannot think. The real work, the crafting of the original letter, the meticulous entry in the formal ledger, the drafting of complex contracts, still falls to the pen. The machine is an assistant, a labor-saving device for the tedious parts. But the implication hangs in the air, mingling with the scent of ink and paper. If a machine can do this part, what else might it one day do? Your mastery of the shaded downstroke feels suddenly, oddly vulnerable, like a cavalry officer hearing the first report of a rifle from an unseen enemy. A lesser-known, slightly amusing side effect of the copying press was the occasional disastrous error. An inexperienced clerk might overwet the tissue, causing the ink from the original to bleed into a ghastly, blurred mess, ruining both documents and requiring the whole thing to be rewritten by hand anyway, a Pyrrhic victory for mechanization. You return to your ledger, but the rhythm is broken. The sounds of the office now have a new counterpoint: the thump of the stamp, the creak of the press screw. Historians still argue whether the clerks of this era saw these machines as liberators from drudgery or as harbingers of their own obsolescence. For you, in this moment, it's a bit of both. The stamp means you don't have to write received 500 times a month, saving your hand for more important work. But it also means that particular skill, writing a perfect, tiny received, is no longer valued. The goalposts of excellence are moving. It's no longer just about beautiful handwriting, it's about beautiful handwriting for purposes a machine cannot yet fulfill. The mental calculus shifts. You must be not just a copyist, but a composer, a thinker, a manager of information, because the mere act of duplication is being commoditized by brass and rubber. You pick up your pen, the flexible steel nib feeling both ancient and defiant. You have a statement of account to write, a narrative of debits and credits that requires judgment and layout. No stamp can do this. No press can replicate its unique necessity. You dip the pen, your movement a conscious reassertion of your craft. The machine may whisper of the future, but for this task, in this moment, the elegant, inked line of the human hand is still the only true authority. A soft rustle of taffeta and the scent of lavender water briefly cut through the office's odor of masculinity and ink. Miss Eleanor Driscoll glides to a desk in the far corner, a space recently partitioned by a Japanese screen. Women are entering the ledger. It's a tentative, controversial incursion, but an economic one. The post office, the telegraph companies, and now some progressive mercantile houses are hiring them as typewriters and junior copyists. Their arrival necessitates a quiet revolution in the script itself. The fine, shaded copperplate you wield, with its demanding arm movement and pressure, is seen as too physically strenuous for the supposed female constitution. The Spencerian hand, with its lighter touch and more upright posture, is often deemed more suitable. Copybooks are published specifically for ladies' commercial hands, promoting a style that is clear, rapid, and elegant without being ostentatiously powerful. It's a script of compromise, designed to fit a new workforce into an old system without overly disturbing the gentleman. You watch, discreetly, as Miss Driscoll arranges her tools. Her posture is different. She doesn't write from the shoulder with the same bold pivot. Her movement is more contained, originating from the elbow and wrist. Her script, from what you can glimpse, is indeed a modified Spencerian, exceptionally neat, uniformly slanted, but without the deep shades. It is legibility incarnate, but it lacks the authority of your shaded downstrokes. This, of course, is partly the point. Her role is to copy correspondence and fair copy drafts, not to authorize entries in the grand ledgers. Her writing is a tool for communication, not a symbol of financial power. The introduction of women also changes the social ecology of the counting house. The loud banter and tobacco smoke have been curtailed. There's a new, performative silence, a stiffness in the air. The masculine identity of the profession, built on long hours, shared bodily discomfort, and a certain grimy camaraderie, is being subtly challenged by a rustling skirt and a neater, if less majestic, hand. A lesser-known, slightly amusing cultural clash emerged around inkwells. The large, communal pots of ink were deemed unseemly for a lady's use. Women clerks were often provided with, or brought their own, dainty, lidded inkwells, sometimes of porcelain with floral patterns, that held just enough ink for a morning's work. This small act of segregation spoke volumes. Their engagement with the medium was to be contained, limited, and aesthetically separate from the robust, utilitarian mess of the men's domain. Yet, for all the condescension, the women were often faster and more accurate at straight copying tasks. Freed from the burden of having to produce the most impressive hand, they could focus on simple, error-free transcription. A widely accepted historical reality is that the entry of women into clerical work in the late 19th century was a key factor in both expanding employment for middle-class women and in further driving the standardization and simplification of business script, as efficiency began to slowly outweigh ornate display. Miss Driscoll finishes a page, sands it lightly with a pounce pot to dry the ink, and stands to deliver it to Mr. Hinchliffe. As she passes your desk, her eyes flick to your open ledger. You see a flash of genuine appreciation in her glance, a recognition of the craft you possess that she has not been taught. It's not envy, but a kind of professional respect across a stylistic divide. You give a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Historians still argue whether the feminization of clerical work and the accompanying shift in penmanship styles represented a deskilling of the profession, pushing it towards lower-paid women's work, or whether it was a necessary modernization that broke a rigid, guild-like male monopoly and opened the door to greater efficiency. As she returns to her screened desk, you look at your own hand, the knuckle slightly enlarged from years of pressure. Your script is a fortress of tradition, built by and for men like you. Hers is a bridgehead of change. The ledger's content remains king, but the hands that serve it are multiplying, diversifying, and with them, the very definition of what a good hand means is beginning, quietly, to unravel. You return to your work, the shade of your downstrokes feeling suddenly like an antique, a beautiful but heavy piece of armor in a war that might already be changing fronts. The promise of the morning has hardened into the brittle reality of the afternoon. Your back aches, your eyes burn, and the remaining blank pages of the ledger loom like a pale desert you must cross by nightfall. But a greater trial awaits, one that crystallizes all your training, all your pain, all your anxiety into a single, public performance. The examination. It might be for a promotion within the firm, or for a coveted position in the civil service. The setting is always the same, a large, silent hall filled with rows of desks, the air thick with the smell of nervous sweat and fresh ink. You are given a text to copy, often a passage of dense parliamentary prose or a complex financial statement. You are given specific paper, specific ink, and a time limit. And you are watched. Judges, often retired writing masters or senior bureaucrats, pace the aisles, their eyes missing nothing. The scrape of your chair, the frequency of your pen wiping, the sigh you fail to suppress, all are data points in your evaluation. This is where theory meets the trembling hand. The copybook gospel is your scripture, and today, you are its apostle under supreme test. You set up your space with ritualistic care, aligning everything just so. The pressure is immense, a physical weight on your chest. A single blot, a single letter spacing error, a single deviation from the prescribed script style, and you are finished. Your years of practice, your breadcrumb tricks, your shoulder pivots, they must all function perfectly under the gaze of strangers. The text begins. Whereas the aforementioned consignment, pursuant to the covenants heretofore stipulated, shall be rendered payable upon the presentation of bona fide bills of lading, it is legalistic gobbledygook, designed to be torturous to copy. Your mind must split into three. one part reading and parsing the meaningless words, one part governing the geometry and mechanics of your hand, and a third, panicked part monitoring for mistakes and suppressing the urge to look at the ticking clock on the wall. A widely accepted historical fact is that these public writing examinations were a key meritocratic filter for the Victorian civil service and large firms, theoretically allowing a clerk from a modest background to advance on skill alone. But the skill required was so specific, so divorced from practical intelligence, that it also filtered for a very particular kind of mind, one capable of immense, sustained, anxiety-powered focus. The pitfalls are everywhere. The ink provided is often inferior, a test in itself. You must adjust your flow and pressure on the fly. The paper might be more absorbent than you're used to, threatening to feather your hairlines. A lesser-known, slightly amusing tradition was the examination nib. Some examinees would bring a whole box of their favorite nibs, each one tested and retired after a few hours of use at home, saving the very best, most reliable one, the champion, for the exam itself. This nib was wrapped in a sacred piece of chamois and not used until the moment the starting bell rang. To damage or spring this nib during the test was considered a catastrophe of epic, almost mythic proportions. As you write, you enter a state of hyper-awareness. The sound of your own pen is deafening. The scratch of a neighbor's nib is a distraction to be walled out. You complete a line, and your eyes perform the verification sweep, not just for accuracy, but for beauty. Is the shading consistent? Is the slant perfect? The judges are not just looking for correct words, they are looking for character in the script, the character of the writer, as revealed through their control. A nervous hand produces a mean script, they believed. A confident, virtuous one produced a generous hand. Halfway through, disaster strikes. You are forming the compound CT ligature in stipulated. Your flexible nib catches a tiny, unseen fiber in the paper. For a heart-stopping millisecond, it drags, depositing a microblob of ink at the top of the T. It's not a full blot, but it's a flaw, a dark blemish on the perfect field. A hot wave of shame and fear washes over you. The instinct is to stop, to repair. But you remember your training. You have seconds before the ink sets. With your left hand, you quietly retrieve your penknife and, under the guise of adjusting your posture, use its needle-fine tip to lift the tiny fiber from the paper and then, with surgical precision, to scrape away the excess ink. You then burnish the spot lightly with your fingernail. You risk a glance. The fix is nearly invisible, a tiny scuff that will look like a paper imperfection to anyone not looking for it. The recovery is a victory in itself, proof of your coolness under fire. Historians still argue whether these incredibly stressful, hyper-focused examinations were a valid measure of a clerk's suitability for a lifetime of sedentary work, or whether they simply selected for the best performers of a narrowly defined, soon-to-be obsolete circus trick. You don't have time for the debate. The clock is ticking. You dip your pen, your champion nib, and sail on, the repaired flaw a secret battle scar in your campaign for a better wage. The final full stop is a release of breath you didn't know you were holding. You lay down your pen. The performance is over. All that's left is the judgment. The judgment on your examination performance is still weeks away, but another, more definitive judgment is being pronounced in the office of a forward-looking import-export firm across the city. You hear about it later, in hushed tones at a coffee house frequented by clerks. It arrives not with a bang, but with a steady, rapid click-clack click-clack. The Remington typewriter has entered the commercial arena. Initially seen as a curiosity, a machine for the blind, it is now being marketed for business. The first time you see a typed letter, it is a shock. The characters are monospaced, each letter occupying exactly the same width. That is as wide as them. There are no shades, no slants, no flowing connections. The lines are ruler straight, the margins perfectly even, not through human skill, but through the mechanics of a carriage return. The ink is from a ribbon, saturating the page with a uniform, dense black that looks brutally modern. It is legibility stripped of art, communication divorced from character. To your eye, trained for a lifetime to see beauty and nuance, it is hideous. But you cannot deny its terrifying efficiency. A competent operator can outpace the fastest Spencerian clerk by a factor of 3, with perfect uniformity and the ability to produce multiple clear copies using carbon paper, a cleaner, more reliable successor to the messy press. This is the crossroads. The click of the typewriter is the sound of your obsolescence being measured out in keystrokes. The skills you have honed, the geometric precision, the arm movement, the ink alchemy, are becoming specialized, niche. The typewriter doesn't get writer's cramp. It doesn't make perseveration errors. It never has a bad day where its descenders are a hair too short. It just produces. The first to be displaced are the copyists, the human duplication machines. Why pay a clerk to spend a day painstakingly copying a contract when a typist can do it in an hour with carbon copies? Your role begins to shift, subtly. You are no longer just a scribe. You are being pushed towards becoming a composer of documents, a checker of typed pages, a manager of information. Your beautiful hand is now reserved for the final, authorizing signature, or for entries in the formal ledger that are still, for now, considered too sacred for a machine. But the sanctity of the ledger is under siege. The very foundations of the counting house are trembling. A widely accepted historical fact is that the typewriter, more than any other invention, catalyzed the feminization of clerical work, as women were quickly hired as typewriters. The job title came from the machine, operating the new technology, while men often remained in the more analytical, supervisory roles, for a time. You try one in a stationer's shop, just to understand the enemy. Your fingers, trained for the delicate, varied pressures of the pen, feel clumsy and heavy on the hard, circular keys. You press a metal type bar swings up and strikes the ribbon with a loud, definitive clack, imprinting a pristine, soulless on the page. It feels like violence. There is no grace, no flow. It is a binary act, press or don't press. A lesser-known, slightly amusing reaction from the old guard was the claim that typewritten documents were cold and impersonal, unsuitable for building the warm business relationships that flowed from a genteel, handwritten letter. They weren't entirely wrong, but the economic argument was overwhelming. Speed and clarity were winning over warmth and tradition. The ledger you spend all day beautifying is beginning to look less like the vital record of commerce and more like a ceremonial relic, a parchment scroll in a world of newsprint. Historians still argue whether the adoption of the typewriter was a sudden, revolutionary rupture or a gradual evolution, with handwriting and typing coexisting in complementary roles for decades. As you leave the stationer's, the memory of the machine's noise echoes in your head, superimposed over the remembered silence of the examination hall. Your champion nib, your perfect slant, your shaded downstrokes, they feel like a language that fewer and fewer people will bother to learn. The future is clicking towards you, and it has no need for the dancing master's lessons or the geometry of elegance. It needs operators. You walk back to your office, to your ledger, to the familiar, comforting weight of the pen in your hand. You will still perform your craft, and perform it flawlessly. But for the first time, you feel like a preservationist, a keeper of a flame that the world is deciding it can afford to let gutter. The script you produce is no longer just a professional requirement. It is an act of quiet defiance, a testament to a vanishing art, written in slowly drying ink on paper that may one day be the last of its kind. You return to your desk, the phantom clack of type bars still echoing in your mind. The late afternoon light slants through the windows, catching the dust motes in golden beams. It illuminates your ledger, the page half full, awaiting its completion. This is no longer merely a task. It is a ceremony, a last dance in a ballroom that is slowly emptying. You take your pen, your faithful steel nib, not the champion, but a good, reliable one, and you dip it, the ritual feeling more poignant, more deliberate. You are about to perform the final, graceful strokes of an art becoming obsolete. The heading for this section is Closing Balances. The words themselves carry a gentle, unintended poetry. You begin. The capital C of closing is an opportunity for a final flourish. You start with a graceful, looping entrance stroke from below the line, curving up into a shaded downstroke that swells with deliberate, confident pressure before tapering to a point. The oval of the C is perfect, its axis matching the 54-degree slant exactly. You feel the familiar muscle groups engage, the shoulder pivot, the locked wrist, the light fingers. This movement, this coordination of mind and body to produce beauty, is the sum of your working life. As you move into the lowercase l, you think of the copybook pages you filled, the mountains of paper you've inked, the silent, anxious hours of practice. The O is a sealed ellipse, a world of its own. The S is a study in contrasting curves. You are not just writing a word, you are composing a miniature symphony of form. Each letter is a note, each shade a crescendo, each hairline a rest. You complete closing balances and begin the figures. The numbers are as demanding as the letters. The 7 must have a clean, straight crossbar to distinguish it from a continental one. The 0 must be a perfect oval, not a circle, to differentiate it from a sloppily written 6. Your hand moves with an ease born of decades, but your mind is elsewhere. It's on the junior clerk with his Spencerian, on Miss Driscoll behind her screen, on the relentless click from the office across the city. You are writing the end of an epoch in the very script that defined it. The pen whispers, it does not clack. The ink soaks in, it does not strike. There is a deep, melancholic satisfaction in this, a knowledge that you are among the last masters of a universal language that is fracturing into dialects, soon to be replaced by a new, colder tongue. A widely accepted historical fact is that the period from 1880 to 1910 saw the most rapid decline in the teaching of formal business penmanship in schools, as typing and shorthand began to claim curricular space. The beautiful hand was becoming a hobby, not a necessity. You finish the last figure, a long column of pounds, shillings, and pence. You add a final, double-ruled line beneath it, the accountant's equivalent of the end. You sand the page with the pounce pot, the fine powder, a mix of powdered gum sandarac and cuttlefish bone, drying the ink instantly and preventing smudging. You blow the excess away with a soft breath. The page is complete. It is a masterpiece of clarity and tradition, a testament to a set of values that prized visual harmony, permanence, and human-crafted order. It will be filed away, referenced perhaps a few times, and then sit in a vault for decades, a fossil in a legistone stratum. You clean your nib meticulously, wiping it on the pen wiper until it shines, before placing it back in its box. You cork the inkwell. You close the ledger with a soft, solid thud. The sound is a full stop. Historians still argue whether something essential was lost in the transition from the handwritten to the typed, a personal connection, a slower pace of thought, a tangible beauty in everyday records, or whether we simply traded an arduous, exclusive skill for a democratic, efficient tool that unleashed new forms of creativity and work. As you put on your coat, your right shoulder aches with a familiar tiredness. You will feel it tomorrow, and for years to come, a phantom pain of a vanished discipline. You take one last look at the silent office, the ranked desks, the gleaming brass of the new electric lamp on the manager's desk. You step out into the twilight, the city now lit by gas and the first flickering electric arcs. The world is moving on, at a faster, more mechanized rhythm. But in the vaults, in the archives, in the faint memory of a certain slant of light on a dusty page, your beautiful, useless, perfect handwriting remains. A final, fluent signature of an age of ink. You walk home through streets now deep in violet dusk, the sharp anxieties of the ledger softening into a generalized weariness. The specific cramps in your hand fade into a full-body fatigue that is almost pleasant, the own tiredness of a day's labor completed. The cries of newsboys and the rumble of omnibuses seem muffled, wrapped in the wool of your own contemplation. The incredible, minute world you inhabited all day, a universe of pen angles and ink viscosity, expands back out to the scale of a city, of a life. You think not of the single flawed descender, but of the thousands of perfect letters that preceded it. The fear of the examination hall dissolves, replaced by the simple, solid memory of the pen in your hand, doing what it was trained to do. The legacy of all that disciplined beauty is not found in the speed of a transaction, but in the quiet architecture of a page that can calm the eye and order the mind a century later. It's in the muscle memory that still lives in your arm, a ghost of a skill that shaped worlds of paper. It's in the very expectation of clarity we carry forward, even as our tools become pixels and taps. You did not just copy figures, you built tiny, inked monuments to order in a chaotic world, and there is a profound dignity in that which no machine can erase. The pressure lifts, not because the work is over, but because you understand your place in a long, fading line, a craftsman of the fluent line, a geometer of the page. You reach your door, the night air cool on your face. The internal click-clack of the future is silent here. There is only the gentle sound of a key turning, a coat being hung, the familiar sigh of a homecoming. The elaborate mental scaffolding of rules, the slant cards, the copybook maxims, the dancing master's drills, all of it gently collapses into a peaceful quiet. Your hand, the instrument of so much precise effort, lies still at your side, its work done. The ledgers are closed, the pens are clean, the ink is dry. A vast, silent library of your own making exists somewhere in the darkness of a vault, a testament to a lifetime of careful, beautiful marks. And for now, that is enough. The night is deep, and soft, and still.